My name is John Lennard. I'm an independent scholar, and this is a course on Othello. And this first module is on racism. Now, clearly, as soon as we look at Othello as a play, the issue of racism comes up. It has to be dealt with. But people do manage to get themselves in a considerable tangle about it. So there are some things about which we need to be clear. And the first of those, obvious as it is that because Othello, or any work of art, depicts racism, that is not the same as saying that Othello is a racist play, let alone that Shakespeare is racist. To depict racism is not the same as to endorse racism or to promote racism. So that's one thing. Second thing is that although racism may in many ways be a universal thing, I mean, human beings appear to have the capacity to hate other human beings for all sorts of reasons, and any kind of ethnic or sectarian division is a good enough reason for people to hate. But even if that has in some sense been going on since the year dot, it is also true that racism is culturally conditioned. And the kind of racism that we now think about, that we are conscious of, is very specific. And it's very specific for a major reason when it comes to racism against African people, black people. And that's because we are thinking about it in the wake of the Atlantic slave trade. Plantation slavery in the US and in South America. That whole model of racism had not happened when Shakespeare was alive. Yeah? It's not that people couldn't have those thoughts, but it simply did not exist in the same way. An African was as much a figure of exotic curiosity, not one assumed to be, in some sense, kind of menial or worth less than others. So there's a complication about that, and we need to be careful not to project onto the play our racism rather than looking at its discussions of racism. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that Othello, the individual, has of course been employed by the Venetian state as a senior military commander. He's been put in charge of Cyprus. He's expected to fight off a major threatened attack by the Turks. This is not a man in a menial position. And when it is discovered that he has married a white girl, that is accepted. I mean, her father doesn't, but there's no sign that the Duke shares Brabantio's views, or the other senators share Brabantio's views particularly. And again, I mean, you only have to contrast that with the idea of the plantation south in the US to see the difference here. I mean, where even, in the latest the 1950s, there were lynchings because a black man was supposed to have looked at a white woman or whistled at a white woman. So it's really not the same thing. We're looking at a very different cultural thing. And then the fourth point is one that has been there in criticism for a very long time, because clearly Othello is a man of colour, but what kind of colour is he? He's called a Moor. Now, there's Moor. There was also an Elizabethan term, blackamoor, which is not used of Othello. Now, blackamoors were what we would call black people, people of African ethnicity. Moors, also of African ethnicity, but they included what we would think of as Arabs, North African Arabic populations, and Berbers, and all kinds of rainbow stuff in between. Now, as it happens, in 1600, just before Othello was written, there was a Moorish ambassador who was sent to London, to the court of Queen Elizabeth. This gentleman, Abdul Wahid, as it says, he's the Legatus Regis Barbarii in Anglia, the ambassador of the King of the Barbarians in England. And as you can see, he is what we would think of as Arabic in appearance, not what we would think of as black African in appearance. Now, it used to be the case that Othello was quite often played that way down the years. There were a number of actors of Arabic ethnicity or Lebanese ethnicity who played Othello. But of late that has not happened. Things have changed. The way we think about Othello and the way we think about casting the play has changed as well, radically, in the last 20 or 30 years, not much more than that. And there are some things in that that we really need to think about. So yes, Othello is a play that is concerned with racism, but we have to be quite careful in how we think about it. And we need to think about the racism it might be exposing in us and the way we are projecting onto the play, as well as the things that are actually going on in the play. And you can expose those particular sets of issues very powerfully by thinking about the question of casting the play, how we now typically cast it. And so in the next 3 parts, I will be looking at how we cast Othello, how we cast Iago, and how we cast Desdemona.